Bhagavad Gita has Sankhya. It is talking of Purush Prakriti and all of that. It has an aspect of yoga. Sankhya develops the language. Yoga accepts it and builds on the top of it. Every Muslim will know something about the Quran. Every Christian will know something about Bible. For us, at least have some basic understanding. What these different categories are, what is the purpose of that category. A lot of things, a lot of our worldviews, right, that we have today are so anchored in our Vedas. At least have this much knowledge. Christians are talking and calling us false religion, calling us false gods and stuff like that. Your kids there are facing it on every single day. We are so comfortable saying that अच्छा Jesus है चलो हम चर्च भी जाते हैं उनको भी हम मानेंगे अच्छा आप अल्लाह को मानो no problem completely okay we don't even call anybody false normal human beings we are constrained with our own limitations of our senses studying only in English comes with the downside that the translators have their own biases without knowing Sanskrit you will just accept that translation as the truth. We don't have one book to begin with, and we are not a people of the book. Even if one group believes in one thing, there is another Smriti which says something completely different. The Vishnu Puran will talk about Vishnu being Sarvashreshta Devata. Pick up the Shiva Puran. It changes. The hierarchy changes. Shivaji is at the top, and everybody else comes from there. Human being is not born in isolation. So we believe that the human birth comes with few debts. You have the Pancha Rin, you have to pay back the Rin that you are born with. The purpose is, in this life, you have to give back. When I say I am Ami Ganatra, what is the Ganatra that I'm talking about? It is talking about all my ancestors who are giving me the identity of what I am. How do you fulfill it? Dev Rin through Deva Yagna. Then we have Manushya Rin. And lastly, paying back to the nature.
So namaste everyone and welcome back. My name is Yagnesh Patel and this webinar is hosted by Hindu Parents Network, a platform dedicated to empowering diaspora Hindu families through education, resources and advocacy. Today we are joined by Ami Ganatra.
Thank you so much, Yagnesh Bhai. Very, very happy to see you all again.
What I would say, the last conversation, before I ask question to you, we don't want to go down in the chronology, right? That Veda was first and then came the philosophy, the Darshana, and then, all this Ityasa and followed by Purana, because that's something, the path which is more debated and what comes first. We just want to know, saying that what is a common connection between them, right? Are they referring each other, saying that Ityasa, you have a mention about Vedas, right? Or within the Puranas, you have mentioned about Vedas and Ityasa both together, right? What is a common across them? Are they having a cross reference between them?
Oh, absolutely. Let's take the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, let's take the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita has Sankhya. It is talking of Purush Prakriti and all of that, right? It has an aspect of yoga because he's telling do pranayam and all of that, right? It has an aspect of the Upanishadic Jnana where he's saying, I am that Brahma Tattva, that supreme reality of all of it. So it has Vedanta also. So you see, it's all coming together. Also, yoga and Sankhya are considered to be sister schools in the sense Sankhya develops the language of Purush Prakriti and all of that. Yoga accepts it and builds on the top of it, saying that I use this truth to now say, understand what the Purush Tattva is, realize the Purush Tattva in me. Similarly, Nyaya, the approach of Nyaya, is used in a lot of Shastrartha that used to happen, even though it is by itself a separate school of thought. But the approach was used to do Shastrartha across various, even Vedantic schools. They use the principles of Nyaya for that. So this cross connection has always happened, and not just for philosophy. Let's consider Ayurveda. Ayurveda uses Sankhya as the base because it also talks about Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Right? The idea is coming from Sankhya, but Ayurveda develops it further to talk about food, body, and all of that. So it's all very related.
Yeah, very much, very much. And here, I think the also mention about how the things, adapted with the time, right? For example, you have Puranas and Bhakti period, right? In Veda, you don't get the idea that there is a, kind of a devotion, bhakti outright for Vishnu, right? You don't get that even for Devi or Shiva. I mean, there is a hint of it, right? But then there is no something like, you are making Vishnu as your, sole deity here, and he's above, or he's there in Veda. Same for Shiva. He's there as a Rudra. But then you get the idea that it's not the devotional aspect solely, directed to Shiva or Vishnu, right? Ishta concept, right? And then you have a Purana Bhakti period where you can clearly see there is a tilt has happened, right? And you have mentioned that example of Krishna, which Govardhan thing, right? Which is very much running in my mind too. That was the period when, Indra, who was very at the, peak of their in Vedas rituals. And then Krishna came and said that, what? Okay, now on, there's a shift is happening here. You are just one of the natural forces. We are here where, beyond the need for, let's say, time of the thing was that, I mean, the requirement was that now you move from the natural forces to more kind of, devotional thing, because nature things have been settled down kind of. It is not under control. You cannot control nature. Nature often, show you who is the boss. But then you still have a, very much understanding of it that, okay, we can control certain thing. We can control the flow of water and stuff. So now we are moving into direction of something which is what Bhakti and Puranas are showing us, right? How this transition you see?
So I will only share how I understand it. Okay. And there'll be different people who might see it differently. So the way I see it is, see, what happens is when the Vedic period, right, and even a little after that, life was simpler. It was difficult physically, but it was simpler in terms of the interactions. Very clear roles assigned. Different groups are doing different activities, and people are happy with whatever they have, and hence they used to have first simple rituals. Then they started becoming more elaborate. Then you had Rajas who did very, very elaborate yagnas, which went on for days and days and days and days. Now, it was not possible for normal people or the mass to be doing all of this, right? It is very technical, it is very specific. You needed people who were completely into it to do all of this. But the Shraddha, that connection to the Devata, everyone needs, right? Everyone needs that. So over time, it must have happened that there were already some of these, regional practices where they must have had puja of certain devatas and stuff. But later on, over time, the temple worship started and the Ishta Devata worship started. It went together because if you see the Vedic times, you don't really have a mention of mandir as we've seen later on. They were Vedis. आपने यज्ञ मंडप करा है पर आपने मूर्ति करके वो सब उनका पूजा किया है वैसे नहीं था. That was not understood that way. But over time, as this need for individual connection with the divine started happening, right? Which then the bhakti had to be, or rather the worship had to be opened, I mean, there is nobody sitting and opening it, but there was a need for bhakti to become lot more inclusive and easy. Where you would say, अच्छा नाम जप कर लो, ये है भगवान, ये सर्वश्रेष्ठ है. The Brahma Tattva is that. It is manifested as Vishnu or Shiva or whoever you want to consider as supreme Devi, right? And you form that connection with that Devi through simple process, just as Krishna says, Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam. Something very simple. Just give that, chant that name, and the bhakti has happened, right? We are still doing the same. We are still doing Aarti. We are still doing Stuti of the Bhagwan. We are still asking for what we want. But now the ritual is much simpler than what it used to be and open to everybody. So I think that's how the twist, or rather the shift, starts happening in the society. And again, I feel Bhagavad Gita in some way captures it so beautifully, because in the Bhagavad Gita itself, and I mentioned in the book as well, that Arjun asks Krishna, Arjun says, okay, I trust you, you are the Bhagwan and all of that, Krishna, great. But then I hear that people talk about Nirgun Nirakar worship, which was of the Brahma Tattva, right? The Upanishadic Tattva is the Brahma Tattva. Some people talk of Sagun Sakar, where we are talking about a creator God. We are talking about a God who is Ishta, which is the right path. Krishna says both are right. But for normal human beings, we are constrained with our own limitations of our senses. Indriyo, jo hamari indriya hai, that constrain how we perceive knowledge, how we gain knowledge. For us, abstract is very difficult. We need a form, which is like us, to anchor ourselves on. So, Sagun is fine. go for it, right? And that's the shift you see already. That's the bhakti tradition that has emerged and which goes on till date. Again, as I said, I won't necessarily call it chronology. Maybe there were parts where some of this was already happening. So then your tradition is basically a not accumulation, but a synthesis of different practices from different places, from different groups, and then it takes a form of the culture that we see today. So I think that's how just the need for people for that connection with the divine with simpler rituals must have eventually led to this kind of
Yeah, they must be
Purana.
anticipating the invention of phone, and the attention span is ever decreasing, right? So for us, they just came to be this simple method. Otherwise, the complex ritual were too much for today's society. And that, I think, the right question for other tradition and the tantric tradition, right? So same like how they see it in Western academic world. They just, differentiate. Oh, there is a Vedic god and then there is Puranic god. They just want to differentiate, right? There is a different tradition versus what we discussed. There is a continuity and there is undercurrent. We're just changing, adapting with the time, right? It happens same for tantric and Vedic, saying that, and many times, we end up looking down on tantric practices, saying, oh, you know what, this is something voodoo or whatever, it's not something for mainstream people and stuff, right? And versus we clearly see that same deity, right? The deities are same, right?
Yeah.
Shiva, Vishnu, Devi, right? They are there, and but the method of invoking them, connecting with them is different between these two. Just approach is different, just like how we saw in the philosophy of schools that approach is different, but deities are same. The framework is same. I mean, it's just the underlying framework is same. Karma, rebirth, right? Everything is same there. It's just the method is there. But somehow we are seeing that within the system, people are looking down or misunderstand this aspect, and also with the outside of system, perhaps it happens to be outside of system started giving this crude, I would say, outlook, saying that these are different thing, it's not the same thing, right? So they can just there are so many interpretation on this. But yeah, I mean, how do you see tantric and also consider the agamic perspective as well?
So very simply, tantra is what? The individual practices that we do today. Anything. Okay, हमारे घर पे जो मंदिर है उसमें हम जो भोग चढ़ाते हैं, जो माला जप करते हैं, whatever we do, right? दिया जलाते हैं, धूप जलाते हैं. All of that is a part of tantra. The individual practices that we do, even the simple ones, you would call it tantra because tantra deals with individual transformation and individual connection with the divine. Now, what people think of tantra, it is only the Vamachar aspect of it. So, for example, Tantra is broad. Tantra there is what is related to the Vedic practices, comes from the Vedas, follows all the rules and regulations and everything, the restrictions about food, this, that, practices. That is called Dakshinachar. Okay. And there is the Vaishnavas, Shaivas, Shaktas, they all have Tantra, which is Dakshinachar Tantra, which basically gets its legitimization also from the Vedas, because the practices are very, the way we see it. Veg खा सकते हैं, non-veg खा सकते हैं, onion, garlic खा सकते हैं, whatever. Yeah, all I'm talking about some very simple roots, but also following certain aspects like celibacy, following certain nitya karma, certain whatever at an individual level. All that is a part of tantra. Then we have what is called Vamachar, which people tend to look down upon because it is more unorthodox. But it is only one aspect of Tantra. Unfortunately, today what has happened is when people say Tantra, they only talk about that, which is the Vamachar aspect of it. Vamachar, first of all, is not open to everybody. For Vamachar, any guru who has achieved some siddhi in that Vamachar aspect has to initiate you. It cannot be done without initiation. Also, the idea of Vamachar is not material pleasure. The idea of Vamachar is to become so detached with the good and bad and everything, because at the end of the day, Ishavasyam idam sarvam. All of this is the manifestation of that Bhagavad Tattva. So, then even that the ashes in the crematorium are also not something you should feel any aversion from, because they are also Ishavasyam. You should not feel any aversion from even human flesh because that is also Ishavasya. So that is the idea of complete transformation through such practices which are very unorthodox and esoteric, as I said. But that is just one part of Tantra which was never mainstream and which was not open to anybody, everybody, anyways. So there is a misuse of that part which often happens. That's
Right.
the unfortunate part of it. But the regular puja paddhati that we do, the naam japa we do, the meditation pranayam that we do, all that is tantra only because
Yes.
it deals with individual worship as we do it today.
And Dakshinachar side of Tantra,
Yes,
which is quite close to Vedantic
yes. Vedic.
way of worship. Right. Okay, so I think we will take some of the question, but before that, this last question I have is how do we? I mean, the way we see it, this quite a long ground, right? Many people will just go and say, we can't even say we can finish Gita, and then you have so many things to now worry about and just consider, right? How do you see that? How people can start? Is Sanskrit necessary, or even for, let's say, people not just living in Bharat or India, right? But people living here, especially our audience who is living here, for them it is saying that okay, we have limited time, right? And then also we are living here. What is the aspect of our knowledge which is can be used, or can be we learn things and can be helpful for our kids and our family, right? How do you see this?
So one is not everybody needs to go into detail of all of this. People take one and spend their entire life becoming an expert on that one topic, right? So the idea that I have in mind for the larger Hindu society is that this table I have on page 8, no, this one. Yeah. I don't know if you can see it.
No, I think
Sorry,
it
you can't.
yeah, that it,
Yeah. But it's basically the Shastra Pantheon table. Just know what are the Shastras that we talk about. Like every Muslim will know something about the Quran. Every Christian will know something about Bible. Or rather, a lot more about Bible and Quran. For us, we have so many. At least get to know what these different categories are. What is the purpose of that category? At least have this much knowledge. Second, the normal practices that you do, that you continue to do, whichever sampradaya you are a part of, perfectly okay. And then pick anything else that you want to go deeper into if you want to go deeper into. If not, doesn't matter. At least have some basic understanding. What I have seen is typically people have a calling. Like for me, as I said, for me, the path was Yoga Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, Itihas, and then everything else, then Arthashastra. But some others, they love the Puranas. They absolutely love the Puranas. For some others, it's the Upavedas, like Ayurveda. People get deeper into Ayurveda. People get deeper into Arthashastra. That is another area which people take up, right? So there are these different things, and people can find their path. But at least have an idea of the whole lay of the land, because you will see the connections that come out of it. It's just
right.
very, very, how do I say? It's just very, very, well, enriching is one word, but just to know where we are coming from, just to know this legacy that we are custodians of, right? It is empowering, and also you feel like, okay, I'm responsible for it. I need to do something about it. At least that happens. So you'll pick any one and go deeper. And you know that we are not, as a lot of, especially in the US, I think it's even more, right? Because every now and then I keep seeing videos where two Christians are talking and calling us false religion, calling us false gods and stuff like that. At least in India, we don't face it so much. Your kids there are facing it on every single day. Every single day, they are faced with such people who are saying that, Baba, you worship false god or you worship a false religion. So if they know what kind of intellectual and spiritual legacy they are custodians of, at least have an idea of it, I think they will be much comfortable in calling themselves Hindu and in being Hindu. I think that much information we should have. I think that's
Yeah,
what I
so
have
it's
to say.
like creating a base kind of a thing, which is, of course, you can explore based on your interest later, but at least these are there for me as a possibility, right? We don't have a one book, but we have multiple way of connecting things, right? And based on your interest, you can just pick one of them, but at least have a base knowledge that, oh, this is the different type of thing we have, and then out of this we can pick anything, and the journey will continue.
Also, I
Okay.
want to say a lot of things, a lot of our worldviews, right, that we have today are so anchored in our Vedas. So we are so comfortable with multiplicity of devatas. We are so comfortable saying that अच्छा Jesus है, चलो हम church भी जाते हैं, उनको भी हम मानेंगे. अच्छा आप अल्लाह को मानो, no problem, completely okay. We don't even call anybody false. It just doesn't strike us that there is a false god or a false religion like the others do. Why is that? It is also coming from the Vedas itself, where we have a sukta which has this beautiful line, Ekam Sat Bahuda Vipravadanti. That there is this one truth. Like you mentioned, you gave an example when we were talking about the darshanas, right? There is this one truth, and different people approach it in different ways. This one line captures the entire worldview of the Hindu mind. So a lot of how we are, how we deal with the external world is also coming from the Vedas. So even if we get some sense of it, I think it'll make us a lot more confident in our identity.
Absolutely. And the aspect of knowing Sanskrit, right? How serious you see that, saying that you start with that or you can pick along the way?
See, just to get a good overview and basic understanding, I don't think you need to know Sanskrit. Okay. However, the prarthanas, some shlokas, some chant, that doing it in Sanskrit is obviously helpful and definitely helps. So at that level, I feel everybody should know. Few shlokas with their meanings, prarthanas and their meanings, that everyone should know. But to get an overview of the scriptural pantheon itself, to get an understanding of the ideas, you don't necessarily need Sanskrit up to a certain level. But if you need to go deeper into it, then I think having a working knowledge definitely helps. So if somebody wants to dig deeper into the Yoga Sutras, you can do it without Sanskrit as well. But if you know even a little bit of Sanskrit, the whole learning experience becomes way more profound. And that's true for every subject. The other thing is, in today's world, studying only in English comes with the downside that the translators have their own biases, especially when there are non-Indian translators, right? And without knowing Sanskrit, you will you will just accept that translation as the truth. That also becomes a problem. So as I said, if you start getting deeper into any subject, side by side, developing even a working knowledge of Sanskrit. Like I can't claim to be a Sanskrit expert, so to say, but I have a working knowledge of Sanskrit where if something is wrong, I can pick out, or if there is something given, I at least know where it is going or what the context is and what it means. So even that is enough. So is it a must have? No, for introduction, for getting an overview, but for going deeper, definitely helps.
Sure.
But don't let not knowing Sanskrit stop you from beginning your studies. That is what I will definitely say.
Right. So for interest of time, we cannot take many questions, but let's just finish it with you. We call it rapid fire question. You can answer, Ramiji, one sentence answer for this question, because they are quite frequent in what we see in a textbook these days, or even in wherever the popular misconception there are associated with Hindu Dharma, right? So it's just mostly around Vedas. Was there any caste-based discrimination, what we call, birth-based discrimination in Vedas?
So I can't give a one-word answer here. In the Vedas, we have the Purush Sukta, which talks about designing a society based on 4 varnas for sure. Okay. In one of the Aranyakas, you have a mention saying that the yagna, the ritual, is not for the Shudras. It clearly says that. It says that Upanayan has to happen for the other three varnas and not specifically for the Shudra. That is mentioned, but that is only one line mentioned there. But again, you have stories in the Brahman. So a Veda typically has 4 parts. As I said, Gyan Kand, Karma Kand is one part. In the Karma Kand, you have Samhita and Brahman. The Brahman will speak a little more about the process and the rules and all of that. So it has certain stories where a certain person was a son of a Dasi. And when he wanted to chant the Vedas, he was asked to leave. However, that person was so committed and so smart and so diligent that at some point he started meditating on his own. And a sukta came to him, and Saraswati Nadi changed its course, and he was then accepted in the community as a mantra drishta. But the fact that the stories have been given also tells me that there were definitely some rules around it. Will I call it discrimination? No, because discrimination means that some group was actively oppressed or something like that. That you definitely don't see. But coming to the Dharma Shastras, if you see from today's perspective, may not have been so then, but if you see from today's perspective, there are definitely, and we cannot deny it, there are definitely prescriptions which come across as discriminatory towards women and Shudras. Definitely in the Dharma Shastras, but not in the Vedas. It talks about, it has some connection, but there is no direct discrimination except for the fact, as I said, that the ritual adhikar is not given to the Shudras.
Is there any modern analogy we can use? Let's say, as universities are there, they are, they don't give admission to everyone, right? You need to come up with
That is
certain.
why I will keep away from it for one simple reason. Everybody has the right to apply, right? Nobody said that you cannot apply because you're born in XYZ community. So it's not a good analogy at all. And what I'm saying is it's okay. That's how the societies were then. All pre-industrial societies were like that. We need not become overly defensive about it. The issue is there are some of these problems in the society even today. But we don't even have to do false analogies to explain some of those things. What is clear is this, that Purush Sukta, people use Purush Sukta to claim discrimination, which is not at all true. Purush Sukta just talks about 4 categories of professions in the society. That is it. It does not say that it is a hierarchy. It does not say that one is better than the other. Okay. The ritual adhikar part is mentioned in one of the Brahmans, where it says a certain group cannot have ritual adhikar. There also it doesn't say that Ved hi nahi padh sakte. वो नहीं hai. But if you go to the Dharma Sutras, which is part of Vedanga and the Kalpa, there is something called as Gautam Dharma Sutra. It is very harsh on some of these aspects. It's very harsh on some of these aspects, as you would expect in any pre-industrial society. So we don't need to become overly defensive about it. We don't need to try to justify it. It is how it was in every society. People move on and get beyond it. The issue comes when there are certain people in the society, even today, who harp on it, say, nahi, usme likha tha, aisa hi hona chahiye. Okay, they can't impose it today because the constitution is different from the Dharma Shastra, right? But they do say that you don't follow it, fine, in this loka, but you will still pay for it in the next loka, in the Janma, or rather outside the loka. So you still have people like that, and you have other gurus who don't believe it. So imposition versus prescription actually depends on how people are seeing it. And again, we've had this debate also across all these years and centuries, with people being very strong on the imposition part and others saying, no, it's just prescriptive. That is why we have so many sampradayas, no? That is why on one hand, we have the super orthodox Martha Mathas of Kanchi, Sringeri, Puri, all of that. And we have Chinmay Mission, RK Mission, Gayatri Parivar, Arya Samaj, which are not that Smriti orthodox. And nobody kills each other. That's the beauty of Sanatan. Nobody kills each other. If today, as a woman, I want to chant the Vedas, Kanchi Math will not accept me. As a non-Brahmin, Kanchi Math will not accept. But you have Chinmay Mission which will accept. You have Arya Samaj which will accept, right? You have other schools which will accept. So, as I said, the beauty of Sanatan is you have all kinds. But everybody allows the other to exist and live, and not say, tum ye nahi karoge, to STSJ ho jayega. That is the beauty. Because people will obviously have all sorts of thoughts.
Yeah, very good. So next is Sati, right? Is that you see any reference in Veda?
In the Veda, absolutely not. In the Vedas, in fact, in the Antyeshti Sukta, it's very clear that the lady whose husband has died, that's how they have shown it. The Sukta clearly asks the lady to say, now you get up and go back to the world of the living. There is no mention of Sati there. However, coming to the Dharma Shastras and Purans, you do have references to Sati, even in the Mahabharata. The difference is that it was not imposed or a compulsory rule. It was still considered as something very pious for the lady. However, while saying that, you will also see in the Puran that some or the other rishi will tell the lady, don't do it. It is not necessary to do it. And you have lots of examples of women who did not do it. You also have few examples of women who've done it. But it was not compulsory at all. So that is there. But the Ved definitely clearly say that, oh, lady, your husband has died. Now his cremation has happened. Now go back to the world of the living. So that is clearly mentioned in the Vedas. So no sati, as in no prescription of the sati in the Vedas.
How about Aryan invasion theory, saying that any hint where it says that Veda came from out or written in outside
Within
of
the Ved, there is absolutely no memory of any kind of invasion, none whatsoever. It talks about the geography of this country, it talks about the rivers of this country, it talks about the mountains of this country. So one thing is for sure, that kaun kidhar se aaya, who came from outside, all that jane do. The Vedas themselves, the language Sanskrit itself, is very much a creation, or very much very much a creation of this land, of this kshetra. Vedas have not come from outside, for sure. And people who've composed the Vedas also have no memory of any outside world, even if they came from it. In fact, in the Vedas, you have, especially in the Rigveda, you have something called a Dashrajanya war. It talks of a war between 10 kings, and there is a migration outside of this kshetra. So people who left, they went to the other side of the Sindhu Nadi. That is what we are told. So if one has to find some migration information, it would rather support the OIT, outside of India theory, not in coming inside of India. So that mention is there, but which is outside of India.
Yeah. So the reason I ask all these three questions, unfortunately, in our textbook here in US and even Canada, we can say that we see this all thing being taught as a monolithic thing, which is part and parcel of Hindu dharma, right? It's just a very concrete thing. There is no nuances, right? It just bang on there. They explain or run the caste topic for a week to explain things, and then skit come out of it.
I think I want to add one thing to the caste, to that smriti, to the jati topic that we discussed, because you asked about prescription and imposition, and I should have clarified it. It skipped my mind. So I'll tell you, I just want to ensure that everybody knows this. Again, we don't have one smriti. Okay, we don't have one smriti. We have many smritis. People only talk of Manusmriti when they talk of Dharma Shastras. That's not true. We have Manusmriti, Yagnavalkya, Parashar Smriti, Narad Smriti, a lot of that. And even though certain sampradayas believe that, oh, this is imposition and this has to happen only as given in the Smriti, within the Smritis themselves, like this different Smriti, actually do not agree on everything. There are differences in the various Smriti itself. For example, Manusmriti does not recommend widow remarriage at all. Parashar Smriti is a lot more liberal about it, of widow remarriages. In terms of inheritance, Manusmriti will say only the eldest son should get the larger amount of the share. Whereas going to the other Smriti, it says, no, everybody gets equal, or do it as needed. That's what the Arthashastra says. So you already see this in the Smritis. So when somebody says that, oh no, this is imposition, then the question is, which Smriti are they holding on to? So that is also there. So when we deal with, especially in the US, because there absolutely the jati is not, even the jati issues which we see in India are not that prevalent in the Indic community outside, right? The one thing which I'd recommend all of you, rather than insisting that हमारे में तो ऐसा है ही नहीं या कोई भी text में नहीं है, because you will find something or the other in some text. We have so many of those, right? Our emphasis should always be on that we are not a people of the book. We don't have one book to begin with, and we are not a people of the book. Even if one group believes in one thing, there is another smriti which says something completely different. Hence, we've always had these multitude of opinions. So don't pin us down on that one line in one smriti. That doesn't work. That's how I think I would at least suggest you all to deal with it.
Okay, moving on to the next one. Is patriarchy inherent in the Vedas?
Now, I don't know how to understand patriarchy. Is it patrilineal? Yes. Patrilineal in the sense, Shadi ke baad, does the woman go to the husband's house? 100%. Because in the Vivah Sukta, that is exactly what is happening. Surya Savitri is a lady. She's getting married to Soma and going to Soma's house. So that is definitely happening. But does it show women as secondary? Does it show women does not have a power? Absolutely not. Not in the Vedas. You start seeing a little bit of that in the Dharma Shastras, but not in the Vedas for sure. In fact, in the Vedas, you have mantra drashtas women. For example, the Dharma Shastras, actually, some of the Dharma Shastras will say women do not have Vedadhikar. Okay, that they do not have adhikar to study the Vedas. Whereas in the Vedas themselves, you have rishikas, women drishtas, women whose suktas have been included as women have been included as rishis in the suktas. You see the kind of dialogues between Agastya and Lopamudra. Lopamudra is the wife, and she is so confident and so empowered, and she's asking for whatever she wants. So, is there any kind of discrimination or considering women second class citizen or second class individual? You don't at least see that in the Vedas. Definitely not.
Okay, now about Purana. Are they purely mythology as they named as such in academia or something beyond?
So I will differentiate between Itihas and Puran. Okay, and I would request everybody to understand the bhav of my saying and don't get offended by one or the other because it does not match with what you've heard. Okay, I'm talking very much in the academic definitions perspective. So Itihas is something that happened for sure in this loka on planet Earth. Okay, even if Sri Ram and Sri Krishna are clearly devatas and clearly avatars in Itihas, they were in human birth, very clearly in human birth. Okay, and whatever they did, it happened on the earth. It is Itihas as everybody calls it. Purans are slightly different. Purans deal with Ishta Devata stories. And let me tell you why calling it Itihas becomes a little difficult. Does it have elements of Itihas? Does it have stories of Rajas? Does it have lists of lineages? Yes. But the core story of the Devatas, we have to be a little careful before trying to push it as Itihas. And I'll tell you why. The Vishnu Puran will talk about Vishnu being Sarvashreshta Devata and everybody else being secondary to Vishnu, including Shiva, Brahma, everybody. Okay. Pick up the Shiva Puran. It changes. The hierarchy changes, right? Shivaji is at the top and everybody else comes from there. In Shiva Puran, the Vedas come from Shivji. In Vishnu Puran, the Vedas come from Vishnuji. In Devi Bhagavad Puran, Devi is the supreme. All the Devatas come from the Devi. Now, if you insist on calling it history in the sense of history as we understand today, what will you take away from this? Which is true? Because you can't have multiple truths if you consider it history in that sense. However, if I am a Vaishnava, for me, Vishnu is supreme. And that is my reality. For a Shaiva, Shiva is supreme. That is the reality. I might still, as a Vaishnava, accept all Bhagwans, but Vishnu will be my Ishta, and that is okay. And I can live with it. And I can live with another person being a Shaiva and considering Shiva as the supreme one, right? What is that? That is mythology. Because mythology does not mean mithya, as we seem to believe it. Mythology means belief system of a group of people. And for them, it is the truth. Okay. But it may not be the truth for some other set of people who don't believe in the same idea. So, in that sense, compared to Mahabharata and Ramayana, Purans will definitely fall more in the mythological category, but mythology does not in the sense of falsehood, as it is often understood when they talk of Mahabharata Ramayana, saying that अरे ये तो हुआ ही नहीं है, ये सिर्फ आइडिया है. नहीं, Mahabharata Ramayana हुआ है. It is our history. It is the story of our ancestors, the real history of our ancestors in this loka, on planet Earth. Okay. Whereas the Purans, when we call it mythology, they are happening in a different loka. Even if we consider history, it is not a history of this loka. We are talking about Devasur Sangram. We are talking about स्वर्ग में जो कुछ हुआ है, उनके इधर हुआ है, पाताल लोक में हुआ है, इस लोक पे नहीं हुआ है. Even if you want to consider it history. So it will always be a belief system of a group of people, and whoever believes it, it will be true for them. In that sense, it is mythology.
Okay. How about 33 crore Devta? And the reference says many things saying that, oh, it's not 33 crore, it's a 33. there is also mentioned in Veda, I think one of the rishis, I think,
The
yeah.
Kati Deva, yes.
So the group of him. Okay, I'll let you elaborate.
So there's a story in the Upanishad where one, I think it's a Brihadaranya Upanishad, where one of the other munis is asking Yagnavalkya Rishi, at Kati Deva, there are how many gods? He starts with saying there are 3033 devatas. So he says, who are these devatas? And then basically it continues, Kati Deva, Kati Deva, Kati Deva, till it comes to one. And then Yagnavalkya actually explains. So he says it's 3033. Now you call it 33 crores, doesn't matter. Basically, he's saying all these are manifestations, different manifestations of the core 33 devatas. Who are these 33 devatas? 11 Rudras, 12 Adityas, all of that he says. Okay. But then this 33 breaks it down into 6, or rather groups it into 6. So this 33 are basic manifestations of the 6. What are these 6? The Pancha Mahabhutas, and there's one more. He divides the Akash into Antariksha and Dev. Okay, so those 6 are the ones from which the 33 emerge. Now, again, Kati Devata is asked. So then he says 3. Out of those 3, which are the different Bhu, Bhuha, Swaha, these lokas from which encompass all the devatas. So these are the 3 main devatas, they say. Then Kati devatas, and like that, Karti Karti, it goes to 1. And what is this 1? It says prana, or the ultimate consciousness, or the Brahma Tattva. So are there 33 crore devatas? Yes, why not? Are there 33 devatas? Yes, everybody else is a manifestation of these 33 devatas. But what are these 33 devatas? Themselves, they are the manifestation of the Brahma Tattva that we talk about. But are we monotheistic in that sense? No. Because within us, we also have a dualistic theory. We also have the whole Purva Mimamsa, which considers all these devatas as equally true. Yeah. So in that sense, yes, we have as many devatas and everything, but the whole idea eventually goes to the Brahma Tattva of the Upanishads.
Perfect. The last one we have. So there is common belief that Hindu text, it's a spiritual text, and that's what, if you are interested, pursue them, right? But then also we know that, as you described earlier as well, there are other aspects of life, they guide us. What are those aspects? In fact, you can, I think I would say you can, probably you can also include the aspect of Rinas and Purusharth, right? Because they are also guiding towards that, how to live in society. Yeah. Right?
So the first, as I said, the whole conceptualization of the Sanatan or the Hindu worldview is, as I explained, the Rita. And everything is a downstream of the Rita. You live your life to uphold that Rita, to uphold that cosmic order in which you see yourself, we see ourselves as a part, as a cog in that wheel which has to keep going on, and a cog which plays an important role in ensuring that the wheel goes on. How does it happen in real life? The ritual is the yagna. Okay, that is one aspect of it. But how do we live to uphold Rita is the whole point. There we have this whole framework of Rina, Varnashrama. All of it is basically a downstream of saying how do we uphold this Rita. पुरुषार्थ में तो बहुत बार बात होता है, वर्णाश्रम पे बहुत बार बात होता है, so I won't go there. But the Rana concept is extremely beautiful and I love it. It comes also directly from the Vedas, then expanded in the Dharma Shastras. So we say the human birth, a human being is not born in isolation. A human being does not live in isolation. We are dependent on everybody around us for our upbringing, for our nurturing. So we believe that the human birth comes with few debts. ऋण है हमारे पे. There are debts that we are born with. These are 5 types. पहले 4 था, but अब 5 मानते हैं. There are 5 types. What are these? Deva ऋण. Obviously, the ऋण of the devatas. Everything is because of the devatas, including ourselves. So we owe it to the devatas. So that is one. This is Rishi ऋण. Then there is Rishi ऋण. Rishi ऋण, the rishis have ensured that the wisdom has lived on for so long. What has that wisdom given rise to? The sanskaras and the Sanskriti itself. When we say I am a Hindu, these are my sanskaras. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the wisdom and the legacy that the rishis have left for us. So there is a rin of the rishis. Then we have Pitru rin. When I say I am Ami Ganatra, what is the Ganatra that I'm talking about? It is talking about all my ancestors who are giving me the identity of what I am, right? That is the Pitru Rin. Who are the Pratyaksha Pitrus that I have? My parents. Then we have Manushya Rin. Everything that we do is dependent on the society. Hamara khana is grown by somebody else. Our clothes are stitched and are woven by somebody else, right? Everything that we do is coming from the society. So we have a rin towards the manushyas, towards the people in the society. That is manushya rin or nru rin. And lastly, bhoot rin. दूध कौन देता है? गाय देती है. खाना कहाँ से आता है? धन धान्य प्लांट से आता है. फल फल कहाँ से आते हैं? पेड़ों से आते हैं, राइट? We owe a lot to the Prakriti for our existence. So we have a rin on the Prakriti, which is called Bhuta rin, beyond the Manushya, everybody else. There's a rin on that. So these are the 5 rins we are born with. Now, what then is the purpose of this life? We are always lost about purpose. I want my life's calling, वगैरह वगैरह. Our worldview is, वो सब ठीक है. But the purpose is inherent in this philosophy itself. The purpose is, in this life, you have to give back. You have to pay back the rin that you are born with, which is called Mahayagna. So you have the Pancha rin and Pancha Mahayagna to fulfill those rins. How do you fulfill it? Deva rin through Deva Yagna. The puja part that you do, the temples that you build, the yagnas that you do, the job that you do, whatever, keeping your devatas alive, keeping those practices alive, right? In the sense of gratitude to the devatas. That is Devarin. Then you have Rishirin. How do you pay back the Rishirin? We don't have to give anything back. We have to give it forward. We have to ensure that we learn that vidya, we learn that wisdom. We imbibe those sanskaras and pass it on to the next generation. We pass on the legacy of that wisdom that we have to the next generation. That is the Rishirin. The Mahayagna to pay back the Rishirin. Then we have what is called the Pitru Yagna, like Pitru Rin, Pitru Mahayagna. What is that? That is a Shraddha ritual that you do. Praying to the ancestors, paying our gratitude to the ancestors, but also ensuring that the lineage continues. That lineage of our ancestors continues. How? Getting married, having children, okay, and taking care of our Pratyaksha Pitrus, which are our parents and our family, taking care of that. That is also a Mahayagna. So the responsibility is on us to ensure that the legacy of the family continues. Then we have Manushya Rin. How do you take care of that? Through seva. हम जो सेवा करते हैं वो क्या है? Paying it forward. We may not know where our food is coming from. Who is that farmer growing our food? But when we do seva of the Manushyas, that itself is paying forward. So that is not just good to have. That is our kartavya. That is what our ancestors our rishis have told us. And lastly, Bhutarin. Paying back to the nature. How do you do that? Yagna is a ritual. But the other is taking care of the ecology, taking care of those animals. If you are taking doodh from the guy, ensure that the bachra doesn't starve and we have only what is extra. Also, you see a lot of practices which we used to have. अभी भी गांव में तो होता है, बहुत होता है. The first roti will always be for the guy. The first roti here now in cities will be for the kawa, right? People will keep water for the birds. वो जो दाना डालते हैं पक्षियों के लिए. That is also a way of paying back to the Prakriti and preserving the Prakriti. That is inbuilt into our framework itself. How much we live up to it and how much we don't, that's a different question altogether. But we should, because that is the Sanatani worldview. And if we understood it better, we would be able to live it better. So I just find this whole concept itself extremely fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unfortunately, most of us are not living up to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think if I have to compare it, right, it's often in modern world they said, you have to express gratitude for your life. Just okay, you are alive, you express gratitude, right? So at surface level, it is there. But then what you are describing, it is that our ancestor has built around it the action, rituals, right? How you activate this worldview of gratitude, right? And in everyday life for different and 5 different thing which you're supposed to do, not just one thing, right? Perhaps modern worldview is that you have to have gratitude towards your family, right? Okay, fine. family is one, but then you, as you said, that is so interdependent. So many things are taken care by so many other natural forces, society, right? So you have riches or knowledge you have gotten, right, from generation to generation. So all of this put together, also this aspect where it says the sustenance of this thing, because sustenance is only done if you follow this. Otherwise, it's just like, it, all of this will fall apart because you're not practicing this sustenance or expressing gratitude for rishis or nature. They are giving you something, right? If that's not followed, then it just next generation it just goes down completely, saying that there is no respect for nature, no respect for ancestor, no respect for rishis, panchbhuta or anything. It just fall down everything, right? So it looks like very well thought of system, saying that okay, it has to be daily thing, not just once in a while. Okay, I'm grateful to alive, right? I'm grateful to my family. Nothing like that. It's very deep, very thoughtful. All right. I think with that, I think we have run out of time, and I don't know how it happens with you, Amiji. Always 2 hours is not enough. In every session we have hosted you, even live session, we run out of time for many question come ups later, but unfortunately we cannot accommodate. But apology for that. So we will close it here, and everyone.
I'll just tell everyone, because a lot of you are in the US. The book now, this is the book. Sorry, you can't see. Is now available in the US as well. So it's available both in the Kindle format as well as in a physical copy format if anybody wants. And if you allow me, I just want to say that tomorrow onwards, tomorrow is the first day. Sunday, we are starting a Mahabharat course if somebody wants to join. So you might share it in your group. I will share the link with
Yeah.
Rajesh Bhatt.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
dhanyawad everyone for joining, and dhanyawad Amiji for your time and so much knowledge you have shared with us today.